There's a jar sitting on my workbench right now filled with salt water, a couple of scrap metal rods, and almost nothing else. No lithium, no fancy chemical lab, no hazard suit. And yet, if I leave it alone for a year, it might still have a usable charge left in it. That single idea is what got me thinking about money in a way I didn't expect. Because everyone talks about lithium batteries like they're the only real option. Expensive, fast, powerful, but also fragile, and eventually dead for good. What if the boring alternative, the kind of battery your great-grandfather might have built in a shed, actually wins the long game? Not on power, not on speed, but on cost, on lifespan, and on how little it demands from you over time. That's the real question driving this whole build. Can something this simple actually outlast a lithium battery in the ways that matter for everyday use? Before we get into the jar and the metal and the actual process, if you're the kind of person who likes seeing whether cheap, old-school ideas can quietly outperform expensive modern ones, go ahead and subscribe to Boring Economic Update now, because this channel is built entirely around testing that question with real hands-on projects. Okay, back to the jar. Let's talk money first, because that's really the heart of this. A decent small lithium battery isn't just a purchase, it's a recurring cost. They degrade, they lose capacity every single charge cycle, and after a few years, even a well-treated one is often a shadow of what it used to be. Then you either pay to replace it, or you pay to recycle it properly, and neither of those is free. Compare that to something built from a few dollars of scrap metal and a spoonful of salt. The upfront power is nowhere close, but the ongoing cost, the maintenance, the replacement cycle, that's a completely different economic story. And that's really what this build is about, not beating lithium at its own game, but asking whether there's a smarter game to be playing for certain situations. So here's what I'm actually working with. The core idea is what's sometimes called a saline, or salt-based electrochemical cell, and people have been experimenting with versions of this for a very long time, long before lithium chemistry existed at all. The basic ingredients are almost embarrassingly ordinary. You need two different metals that react differently with each other, some kind of conductive liquid, usually a simple salt water solution, and a container that can hold everything without leaking. For metals, I picked up some scrap copper and a section of zinc, both things you can often find in old plumbing fittings, cheap hardware store stock, or honestly, sometimes just lying around in a junk drawer. Total cost for the raw materials was small enough that I almost feel a little silly calling it an investment. We're talking about the kind of money you might spend on a couple of cups of coffee, not the kind of money that shows up on a monthly budget spreadsheet. That gap right there, between what a store-bought battery costs and what a homemade cell like this costs, is the entire economic tension of this video. Now, before touching anything, I did what you should always do with any hands-on project involving metal, liquid, and a bit of chemistry, even a mild one like this. I checked the condition of the materials first. Any metal I used had to be reasonably clean, free of heavy coatings or rust that could interfere with the reaction or introduce something unpredictable into the mix. I also thought through basic safety, because even a gentle chemical reaction deserves a little respect. Salt water isn't dangerous the way a lab acid is, but you still don't want it sitting on bare metal indefinitely without a plan. And you don't want to be careless around the electrical connections once things are hooked up. So gloves, a clear workspace, and a slow, deliberate pace. That was the plan from the start. Next came the actual setup, which is where the simplicity of this whole concept really starts to show. I took the container, which in my case was just a clean glass jar, nothing exotic, and I mixed a simple salt water solution inside it, keeping the ratio modest rather than trying to overload it with salt. Then I positioned the two different metal rods, so they were both submerged in the liquid, but not touching each other directly. That gap matters, because the whole point is for the reaction to happen through the liquid, not through a direct short between the metals. After that, I connected a wire to each rod, the kind of basic wiring you'd use in any small electronics project, nothing specialized or hard to find. At this stage, there's no power yet, just potential. It's a strange feeling looking at a jar of salt water and two metal rods, and knowing that, in principle, a tiny electrical difference is already starting to form between them. I hadn't tested anything yet, hadn't touched a multimeter, hadn't tried powering anything at all. But that's exactly the point where curiosity really takes over, because you start wondering how much this simple setup can actually do. Will it produce enough of a trickle to matter for anything real, or is this destined to be a fun but useless science demonstration? Will the metals hold up, or will they corrode into uselessness after a short burst of activity? And underneath all of that technical curiosity is the economic question that started this whole project, whether the ongoing value of something this basic could actually rival, or in some narrow way outlast, the expensive lithium alternative sitting in a drawer somewhere in most people's homes. With the jar wired, the metals placed, and the solution mixed, everything was finally ready for the first real test of whether this quiet, old-fashioned idea had any practical life in it at all. With everything wired and sitting quietly in the jar, it was finally time to see if this thing had any real life in it. I reached for a simple multimeter, the kind almost anyone can pick up cheaply, and touched the leads to the 2 wires coming off the metal rods. The needle moved, not dramatically, not in a way that would power a house or even a lamp, but it moved, and that small twitch felt oddly satisfying. There was a real, measurable voltage sitting in that jar of salt water and scrap metal, something you could actually read and record. It wasn't a huge number, and I'm not going to pretend it was some kind of breakthrough reading, because that would go against the whole honest spirit of this experiment. What I can say is that it produced a small amount of power, roughly comparable to what you'd expect from a very modest single-cell battery, enough to register clearly on a meter, and enough to hint at real potential if scaled up. That's the moment where curiosity really sharpens, because a single reading on a meter is one thing, but making that trickle of power actually do something useful is a completely different challenge. So the next step was connecting a small load, something simple enough that even a weak source of electricity might be able to nudge it into life. I chose a small LED, the kind you'd find in basic electronics kits, because it needs very little to light up, and it gives you an honest, visual answer instead of just a number on a screen. I connected the LED carefully, respecting the polarity, since these little components only work one way around. Nothing happened. No glow, not even a faint one. That's the honest part of this story, because a single jar cell like this often isn't quite enough on its own to push a load like an LED into visibly lighting up. Rather than treating that as a failure, I treated it as information, because that's really what testing is for. The next logical step, and one that ties directly back to the economic thinking behind this whole project, was combining multiple cells together. This is where the process becomes less about one clever jar and more about building a small system, similar in spirit to how real batteries are made from multiple linked cells rather than a single unit. I set up a second jar, essentially duplicating the first. Same rough ratio of salt water, same type of metal rods, same careful placement to avoid direct contact between the 2 metals. Then I connected the 2 cells together in sequence, wiring the positive side of one to the negative side of the other, which is the basic ident behind stacking simple cells to increase their combined output. After connecting the 2 jars this way, I went back to the LED and tried again. This time there was a very faint glow, barely visible in a lit room, but unmistakable in the dark. That was a real turning point in the process, because it proved the underlying concept actually works, not just in theory, but in a way you can physically observe with basic materials and a bit of patience. It also revealed the honest limitation immediately, because getting even a small, steady glow required combining multiple cells, more container space, and more assembly time. This is exactly where the economic side of the story starts to get interesting again. If I think about the time invested so far, gathering the metal, mixing the solution, wiring the cells, testing, adjusting, and retesting, it adds up to a modest but real chunk of an afternoon. That time has value, even if it doesn't show up on a receipt anywhere. Compare that to buying a small battery off a shelf, where the time cost to the consumer is close to zero. You simply pay money and walk away with something that works immediately. So already, 2 very different kinds of cost are competing here, direct money spent versus personal time and effort spent, and any honest evaluation of whether this is worth it has to weigh both sides. Continuing the process, I wanted to check something else that matters a lot for long-term value, which is how stable this setup remains over time, rather than just in the first few minutes after assembly. I left the connected jars sitting untouched for a while, checking the voltage periodically, rather than constantly disturbing the setup. What I found was that the reading didn't spike and crash the way you might expect from something unstable. It stayed fairly consistent, dipping only slowly rather than dropping off a cliff. That slow, steady decline is actually a meaningful result, because it points toward the core promise of this whole approach: longevity through simplicity rather than through advanced chemistry. A setup like this isn't trying to compete with lithium on raw power or fast charging. It's competing on a completely different axis, one based on how gently it fades, how easy it is to refresh, and how forgiving it is if you simply leave it alone for long stretches of time. I also paid attention to the metal rods themselves during this process, since their condition over time tells you a lot about how sustainable a setup like this really is. There was some visible surface change on the more reactive metal, a bit of dulling and light buildup, which is a completely normal part of how this kind of reaction works. The other metal stayed comparatively cleaner, which lines up with the basic behavior you'd expect from 2 different metals reacting through a saltwater solution. None of this was dramatic or alarming, just the quiet, gradual signs of a slow chemical process doing exactly what it's supposed to do. By this point in the experiment, the full picture had become pretty clear. The build itself, from raw materials to a working, if modest source of electrical current, had gone from an abstract idea to something sitting right there on the table, glowing faintly, holding a steady reading, and clearly not requiring any of the exotic chemistry that modern battery technology usually depends on. The real question left standing wasn't whether it worked, because it did, in its own limited but genuine way. The real question was what that kind of quiet, modest, long-lasting performance is actually worth to someone thinking carefully about their money, their time, and their expectations. So here's where things stood. A pair of simple jars, some scrap metal, a bit of salt water, and a faint but real glow from an LED that had no business lighting up from something this basic. That result alone answers the technical question, because it proves the core idea works. But the more interesting question, the one this whole channel exists to dig into, is what that result actually means once you translate it into real-world value. Because proving a concept and proving it's worth your time and money are two very different things. Well, let's start with what this experiment actually demonstrated, stripped of any hype. It showed that a genuinely simple electrochemical setup using nothing exotic can produce a small, measurable, and reasonably stable electrical output over time. It showed that this kind of output degrades slowly rather than crashing suddenly, which hints at a very different lifespan pattern compared to the sharp decline you often see in overused rechargeable batteries. And it showed that scaling up, even in a basic way like linking two jars together, meaningfully increases what you can actually do with it, moving from an unreadable trickle to a faint but visible glow. Those are honest, grounded results. Not a revolution, but not nothing either. Now here's the part where I have to be just as honest about the limits, because pretending otherwise would go against everything this channel stands for. This setup, in its current form, is not going to charge your phone, and it's not going to replace a proper battery in anything you rely on daily. The power output is small, the setup takes real physical space, and the materials do change over time, which means at some point you're either refreshing the solution, cleaning the metal, or accepting a slow decline in performance. None of that makes it a failure. It just means this isn't a like-for-like replacement for lithium. It's a different tool entirely, built for a different kind of situation. So where does something like this actually make economic sense? Think about a scenario where you don't need much power, but you do need something reliable, low cost, and low maintenance over a very long stretch of time. Maybe something running a small sensor, a tiny indicator light, or some kind of low-draw educational or backup setup where speed and intensity don't matter nearly as much as steady, quiet persistence. In a case like that, the math starts to shift in favor of the simple approach, because you're not paying for peak performance. You're paying for dependable, low-drama output that doesn't ask much of you once it's built. Now think about the opposite scenario, something where the physical price of that recurring battery cost, and it isn't as painfully expensive as it seems the first time you swallow it. That's the trade-off nobody talks about enough. The real cost of a DIY approach like this isn't just the materials, it's the learning curve, the trial and error, the time spent troubleshooting when the LED refuses to light up the first time, and the mental effort of understanding what's actually happening in that jar instead of just trusting a manufacturer's label. For some people, that time and effort is genuinely enjoyable, even valuable in itself, because you walk away understanding something you didn't understand before. For others, that same time is better spent elsewhere, and paying a little extra for a ready-made battery is the smarter economic choice, even if it feels less satisfying. Neither answer is wrong, and that's really the heart of practical economic thinking. Matching the tool to the actual situation instead of assuming one option is universally better. There's also a quieter lesson hiding in this whole experiment, one that goes beyond batteries entirely. We're used to thinking that newer, more advanced, more chemically complex automatically means better, but this jar of salt water is a small, physical reminder that better always depends on what you're optimizing for. If you're optimizing for raw power and speed, lithium wins clearly, and nothing here changes that. But if you're optimizing for gentle, low maintenance persistence, low upfront cost, and materials you can source almost anywhere, the boring, old-fashioned option starts to look surprisingly competitive. That's not a flashy conclusion, but it's an honest one. And honest conclusions tend to hold up a lot better over time than exciting ones that don't survive contact with reality. Looking back at the whole build, from picking up cheap scrap metal to mixing a simple solution, wiring two humble jars together and watching a faint light appear where there was none before, the real value wasn't just the electricity itself. It was the process of testing an old idea against a modern assumption and discovering that the old idea still has something real to offer, even if it will never make headlines or replace what's already sitting in your phone or your car. Sometimes the most valuable lessons about money and value don't come from the newest, shiniest technology, but from slowing down and testing whether the boring, overlooked option still has a place in the picture. If this kind of grounded, hands-on economic thinking is something you want more of, drop a comment and tell me what everyday item or forgotten idea you think deserves this same kind of honest, practical test. And if you found this useful, share it with someone who still believes newer always means better. Because sometimes the quiet, old-fashioned answer is the one worth remembering.